The dust swirled like copper pennies across the parched wooden boards of Main Street as Sarah Porter stood frozen outside the bank of North Platte, Nebraska, the foreclosure notice clutched in her trembling hands. The whispers followed her like shadows, slithering through the small town faster than a prairie fire in August. Widow Porter, once the respectable wife of the most prominent rancher in Lincoln County, now stood alone, penniless, her reputation as tarnished as an old silver dollar. "Madam." "You all right there?" The deep voice cut through her thoughts, warm and solid as the Nebraska earth. Sarah turned, squinting against the late afternoon sun to find a tall silhouette approaching. As he stepped closer, the stranger's features came into view: a weathered face bronzed by the sun, eyes the color of a clear summer sky, and shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the Western Territories. "I'm fine," she replied automatically, though the paper crumpling in her white-knuckled grip told a different story. "Forgive my boldness, but folks standing that still in the middle of the street are usually either fine or about to faint dead away." His lips quirked upward, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "And you don't strike me as particularly fine at the moment." It was 1878, and North Platte was growing faster than most frontier towns, but not fast enough that strangers regularly offered kindness without wanting something in return. Sarah stiffened, years of hard lessons making her wary. "I don't need charity, Mr. Dawson, Jacob Dawson." He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with hints of copper where the sun had lightened it. "And I wasn't offering charity, madam. Just concerned when I saw a lady looking like she'd seen a ghost in broad daylight." Despite herself, Sarah felt the corners of her lips tug upward. "Sarah Porter, and I wasn't seeing ghosts, just watching my future disappear before my eyes." She held up the foreclosure notice with a bitter smile. "Porter Ranch," recognition flashed in his eyes. "Thomas Porter's place." Sarah nodded, her throat tightening. "My late husband's, though not for much longer." Jacob Dawson studied her face, and something in his gaze made Sarah stand straighter, suddenly conscious of her faded calico dress and the loose tendril of honey-brown hair that had escaped her practical bun. "I heard about your loss, Mrs. Porter. My condolences." "Thank you, Mr. Dawson, but sympathy won't save my land." She folded the notice and tucked it into her pocket. "If you'll excuse me." "Actually," he stepped forward, then seemed to catch himself. "I just arrived in town looking for work. I've been handling cattle since I was tall enough to reach a stirrup. If you're in need of a ranch hand, a ranch hand." Sarah's laugh was hollow. "Mr. Dawson, I can barely afford to feed myself. The bank is taking everything in 3 days unless I can produce $500. His eyes widened slightly at the sum, but his expression remained steady. "That's quite a pickle." "It's more than a pickle, Mr. Dawson. It's the end of everything I've worked for." Sarah took a deep breath. "But I won't burden a stranger with my troubles. Good day." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Mrs. Porter, sometimes the end of one trail just means the beginning of another." Sarah looked back at him, really seeing him now not just another drifter passing through, but a man standing solid as an oak in dusty trail clothes that couldn't hide his dignity. There was something in those eyes, a steadiness, a certainty that made her wonder what it might be like to have someone to lean on again. "I wish that were true, Mr. Dawson," she replied softly, "but some trails just end." With that, she continued down the street, feeling his eyes on her back all the way to Henderson's Mercantile. Inside, the familiar scent of coffee, leather, and dried goods enveloped her as Florence Henderson looked up from behind the counter. "Sarah." The older woman's face creased with concern. "I just heard about the bank. Gerald Whitley's got no soul for closing on a widow." "He's just doing his job, Florence." Sarah placed a small list on the counter. "I'll need these supplies, on credit if you can spare it, one last time." Florence's eyes softened. "Of course, dear. And you know you're welcome to stay with Edgar and me when I lose everything," Sarah finished, her voice steady despite the pain lancing through her chest. "Thank you, but I'll manage." "You always were stubborn as a mule," Florence sighed, gathering the items on Sarah's list. "But where will you go? What will you do? A woman alone don't." Sarah held up a hand. "I've heard enough about a woman alone from every busybody in this town. Thomas has been gone for 8 months, and I've managed the ranch just fine." "Until the drought took half your cattle," Florence pointed out gently. "And the bank loan took the rest," Sarah admitted. "But I'm not dead yet, Florence. I'll figure something out." The bell above the door jingled, and Sarah turned to see Jacob Dawson entering, his tall frame filling the doorway. "Mrs. Porter," he nodded, then tipped his hat to Florence. "Madam?" Florence's eyebrows rose as she looked between them. "Well, well." Sarah shot her a warning glance before addressing Jacob. "Mr. Dawson." "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, approaching the counter, "but I was hoping to speak with you about a proposition." Florence didn't even pretend not to listen as she continued gathering Sarah's supplies. "I'm not interested in propositions, Mr. Dawson," Sarah replied, her chin lifting. A slow smile spread across his face. "It's a business proposition, Mrs. Porter, one that might save your ranch." Sarah's heart stuttered, but experience had taught her to mistrust sudden solutions. "And what would this proposition entail?" "I've been looking for land to settle on," he explained, removing his hat and holding it respectfully. "I've got savings, not enough to buy a place outright, but enough to—" "Enough to what, Mr. Dawson?" "Enough to cover your bank note." "In exchange for partnership in the ranch." Sarah stared at him. "Partnership with a stranger? That's absurd." "Is it more absurd than losing everything?" His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I've been working other men's land since I was 16. I know cattle, I know ranching. And I've got $500 that says I believe in your land." Florence had stopped pretending to work and was openly watching the exchange, her mouth slightly agape. "Why would you do this?" Sarah asked, suspicion narrowing her eyes. "You don't know me or my land." "I know enough," Jacob replied. "I know Porter Ranch was one of the finest spreads in the county before the drought. I know good land when I see it, and I've ridden past your place. With the right management and some luck with the weather, it could be prosperous again." "And you think you're the right management?" Sarah couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "I think we could be," he corrected. "Your knowledge of the ranch, my strength and experience, partnership." The idea was preposterous, utterly mad, and yet Sarah felt the weight of the foreclosure notice in her pocket. "I need to think about this," she finally said. Jacob nodded. "Of course, but the bank won't wait, Mrs. Porter." "I'm well aware of that," she replied tersely. "I'll be staying at the boarding house," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "You know where to find me when you decide." After he left, Florence let out a low whistle. "Well, that's the most interesting thing to happen in this town since the James gang passed through in '73. "He's a stranger," Sarah said, more to herself than Florence. "Probably a drifter with stories bigger than Texas." "He's a handsome stranger with $500 and an interest in your ranch," Florence corrected. "And what other options do you have, Sarah?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as storm clouds. "I won't marry again if that's what you're suggesting," Sarah said firmly. Florence's laugh was gentle. "Did I say anything about marriage? Though it wouldn't be the worst idea. A woman needs protection out here." "I don't need protection," Sarah snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. "I'm sorry, Florence, it's just, everyone in this town thinks a woman can't survive without a husband. It's not about surviving, Sarah, it's about living." Florence placed a weathered hand over Sarah's. Thomas has been gone nearly a year now. He wouldn't want you to be alone forever." "Forever is a long time," Sarah replied softly. "But for now, I just need to save my home." With her purchases wrapped in brown paper and tucked under her arm, Sarah left the mercantile, her mind churning. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street as she made her way to her wagon. The 2-mile ride back to the ranch would give her time to think. As she climbed onto the wagon seat, she caught sight of Jacob Dawson across the street, speaking with the blacksmith. He looked up, meeting her eyes for a moment before tipping his hat. Sarah nodded stiffly in return, then flicked the reins to set the horses in motion. The ranch came into view as Sarah crested the final hill, a modest but well-built house flanked by a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Beyond stretched the pasture land, brown and parched from the drought, but still her land. Still Porter land. Her throat tightened as she imagined strangers living in the home she and Thomas had built, working the land they had cleared together, sleeping in the bedroom where she had nursed him during his final days. Inside, Sarah moved through her evening routine, mechanically lighting lamps, preparing a simple supper, feeding the few chickens that remained. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence pressing in on her like a physical weight. After supper, she sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, calculating figures that refused to add up to anything but loss. She had $23 to her name. Even if she sold every stick of furniture and her wedding ring, she wouldn't come close to $500 in 3 days. Jacob Dawson's offer floated through her mind again. Partnership. Not charity, not marriage, partnership. Could she truly share her home, her land with a stranger? Could she trust him? Sarah rose and walked to the mantel where Thomas's portrait hung, a serious-faced man with kind eyes and a firm jaw. She traced the frame with her fingertips. "What would you do, Thomas?" she whispered to the silent room. "You always said a Porter never gives up, but you never told me what to do when there's nothing left to fight with." The portrait offered no answers, only the painted gaze that had watched over her for 8 solitary months. That night, Sarah slept fitfully, her dreams filled with foreclosure notices that turned to dust in her hands and blue eyes that watched her from the shadows of her barn. She woke before dawn, her decision made in that quiet space between dreaming and waking. She would accept Jacob Dawson's offer, but with conditions. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more. She would retain ownership of the house itself. And most importantly, she would remain independent, answerable to no one. After dressing and having a quick breakfast, Sarah hitched the wagon and headed back to town. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and dust. By the time she reached North Platte, the town was coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors, ranch hands gathering at the saloon for breakfast, children racing to the schoolhouse at the end of the street. Sarah tied her horses outside the boarding house and straightened her dress before entering. Mrs. Holloway, the proprietress, looked up from her ledger with undisguised curiosity. "Good morning, Sarah. You're in town early." "Good morning, Mrs. Holloway. I'm here to see Mr. Dawson if he's available." The older woman's eyebrows shot up. "Mr. Dawson, room 3 upstairs. Shall I announce you?" "Thank you, no, I can manage." Sarah headed for the stairs, ignoring the speculative look on Mrs. Holloway's face. By noon, half the town would be gossiping about Widow Porter calling on the handsome stranger, but saving her ranch was worth enduring a few wagging tongues. She knocked firmly on the door of room 3, clasping her hands tightly in front of her to stop their trembling. The door opened, and Jacob Dawson stood before her, already dressed but with his collar unbuttoned and his hair slightly mussed, as if he'd just run his hands through it. For a moment, Sarah forgot what she'd come to say, struck by the intimacy of seeing him in his private quarters. Mrs. Porter, he said, genuine surprise in his voice. I didn't expect to see you so early. Sarah took a deep breath. I've come to discuss your proposition, Mr. Dawson. May I come in? He stepped back, gesturing her inside. The room was small but tidy, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair beside a small table. Please sit, he offered, indicating the chair while he remained standing. I'll be brief, Sarah said, remaining on her feet. I'm prepared to accept your offer of partnership with certain conditions. Something flashed in his eyes: relief, satisfaction. She couldn't be sure. I'm listening, he said. First, this is a business arrangement only. The house remains my property exclusively. You may have use of the bunkhouse until more suitable accommodations can be built. Jacob nodded. Fair enough. Second, while we will be partners in the ranch operations, I retain final say over any major decisions affecting the property. His brow furrowed slightly. That's not exactly partnership, Mrs. Porter. It's my home, Mr. Dawson. Her voice was firm. I've worked that land for 6 years. I know every acre, every stream, every problem. I won't surrender control to someone who just rode into town yesterday. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but I expect my experience and judgment to be respected. It will be when earned, she replied. Third, our arrangement will be formalized in writing with the terms clearly stated. I'll have Mr. Ellis, the lawyer, draw up the papers today. Sensible, Jacob agreed. Anything else? Sarah hesitated, then squared her shoulders. Yes, I need to know who you are, Mr. Dawson. Not just your name, but where you come from, your background. I won't enter into partnership with a man I know nothing about. A small smile played at his lips. That's fair. I was born in Missouri, raised on a farm until I was 16. After my parents died of fever, I headed west, worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana. Spent 2 years as foreman on the Circle M Ranch in Wyoming until the owner sold out. I've saved every penny I could, looking for the right place to settle. And you think Porter Ranch is that place? Sarah asked skeptically. I think it has potential, he replied honestly. Good water, decent grazing land, and a hard-working owner who clearly loves it. Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. One more thing, Mr. Dawson. I need references. Someone who can vouch for your character and abilities. You can wire Marshall Cooper in Cheyenne, Jacob said without hesitation. Or Edward Miller at the bank in Laramie. Both know me well. Sarah nodded, satisfied with his prompt response. Very well. If their references are satisfactory and you agree to my terms, we have a deal. And if we're to be partners, he said, extending his hand, perhaps you should call me Jacob. Sarah looked at his outstretched hand for a moment before taking it. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip firm but not overbearing. Sarah, she conceded, withdrawing her hand quickly when the contact sent an unexpected warmth up her arm. I'll go to the bank this morning, Jacob said. When would you like to sign the papers? As soon as possible. I'll speak with Mr. Ellis now. Sarah moved toward the door, then paused. Mr. Jacob, why are you really doing this? There must be easier ways to acquire land than partnering with a near-bankrupt widow. His expression softened slightly. Maybe I believe in second chances, Sarah, for land and for people. Something in his words touched a chord deep within her, but she pushed the feeling aside. This was business, nothing more. I'll meet you at the bank at noon, she said, and left before he could see the confusion in her eyes. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sarah visited Mr. Ellis, who agreed to draw up partnership papers immediately. She sent telegrams to Jacob's references, paying extra for urgent replies. By noon, she had received responses from both men in Wyoming, confirming Jacob's good character and ranching expertise. The knot of anxiety in her chest loosened slightly. At least he wasn't an outlaw or a confidence man. At the bank, Gerald Whitley's surprise at seeing Sarah enter with Jacob was almost comical. The banker's thin face twitched with poorly concealed dismay as Jacob counted out $500 in banknotes and coins on his desk. "This satisfies Mrs. Porter's loan in full," Jacob stated, his voice calm but authoritative. Whitley reluctantly prepared a receipt, his pen scratching against the paper with unnecessary force. "I must say, Mrs. Porter, this is unexpected." "Life is full of surprises, Mr. Whitley," Sarah replied, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from her voice. "Indeed." The banker's gaze shifted between them speculatively. "And what is your interest in Porter Ranch, Mr. Dawson?" "Partnership," Jacob replied simply. "Mrs. Porter and I have entered into a business arrangement." "I see." Whitley's tone suggested he saw something else entirely. "Well, congratulations on your arrangement." Outside the bank, Sarah took her first free breath in months. "Thank you," she said quietly as they walked down the boardwalk. "Don't thank me yet," Jacob replied. "The hard work's just beginning. That ranch needs a lot of attention." "I know what my ranch needs, Mr. Dawson," Sarah said, her pride stinging at his assessment. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Jacob," he corrected. "And yes, you do know your ranch, but you haven't had the manpower or resources to do what needs doing. Now you do. That's why we're partners." Sarah nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the truth in his words. "We should head to Mr. Ellis's office to sign the papers." As they continued down the street, Sarah was acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. Florence Henderson actually paused in sweeping her storefront to stare openly as they passed. "People will talk," Sarah murmured. "People always do," Jacob replied with a shrug. "Does it bother you?" "It shouldn't," she admitted. "But it does. This town has a long memory and not much happens to distract it." "Then let's give them something worth remembering," he said with a grin. "A successful ranch rising from the ashes." Despite herself, Sarah smiled at his optimism. "You make it sound so simple." "Not simple," he corrected. "But possible." At Mr. Ellis's office, they reviewed the partnership agreement carefully. The lawyer had captured all of Sarah's conditions, plus added standard legal protections for both parties. Jacob read through it thoroughly before signing, a fact that increased Sarah's respect for him. Many men would have signed without reading, confident in their superior understanding of business matters. "Well, it's official," Mr. Ellis said, applying his seal to the document. "Porter and Dawson Ranch." Sarah's breath caught at the name. Hearing it spoken aloud made the arrangement suddenly very real. She was no longer alone in her struggle. "Porter Ranch," she corrected quietly. "The name stays as it is." Jacob glanced at her but nodded. "Porter Ranch it is." They left the lawyer's office with copies of their agreement and headed toward Sarah's wagon. "I need to purchase some supplies before we return to the ranch," Jacob said. "Would you mind waiting?" "Not at all," Sarah replied. "I have some errands as well." They agreed to meet in an hour, and Sarah headed to the mercantile, where Florence practically dragged her inside. "Sarah Porter, what on earth is going on?" Florence demanded once they were alone in the store. "The whole town's buzzing about you and that Dawson fellow." "Mr. Dawson has become my business partner," Sarah explained calmly. "He's invested in the ranch and will be helping me restore it." "Business partner," Florence repeated skeptically. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" "Florence." Sarah felt heat rise to her face. "It's exactly what I said, a business arrangement, nothing more." Florence folded her arms. "And where will this business partner be staying? Not in your house, I hope." "Of course not," Sarah replied, offended. "He'll use the bunkhouse." "Well, that's something, at least." Florence's expression softened. "I just worry about you, Sarah. A young, attractive widow alone with a handsome stranger. People will talk. Let them, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. I'm doing what I need to do to save my home. Florence sighed. I know, dear. And I'm glad you won't lose the ranch. Just be careful. Men have expectations even when they don't say so. Jacob Dawson will have no expectations beyond our business agreement, Sarah insisted. I've made that quite clear. But as she left the mercantile with her purchases, Sarah wondered if she was trying to convince Florence or herself. An hour later, Sarah and Jacob were heading back to the ranch, their wagon loaded with supplies. Jacob had purchased tools, seed for winter wheat, and materials to repair fencing. Sarah had bought provisions for the house, including extra coffee and flour now that she would be feeding a ranch hand again. The first thing we should address is the north pasture fence, Jacob said as they traveled. If we're going to rebuild the herd, we need secure grazing areas. The drought dried up the creek in the north pasture, Sarah pointed out. The south pasture still has water. For now, Jacob agreed. But when the rains come, that north creek will flow again. Better to have both pastures ready. Sarah had to admit his thinking was sound. The problem is cattle. Even with the fences repaired, we have only 7 head left. I noticed a small herd of strays in the hills east of your property, Jacob said. Unclaimed from the looks of them, probably scattered during the drought. With a good horse and some skill, we could add them to our stock. Our stock, Sarah repeated softly, testing the word. That will take some getting used to. Jacob glanced at her. I know this isn't easy for you, sharing something that's been yours alone. But I promise you, Sarah, I'm here to help, not take over. The sincerity in his voice touched something in her that had been closed off since Thomas's death. I believe you, she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. They reached the ranch by mid-afternoon, and Jacob immediately set to work, unloading the wagon while Sarah carried her provisions into the house. When she returned to the yard, he had already organized the supplies and was examining the corral fence. You have good horses, he commented as she approached. That bay gelding looks strong. Thunder, Sarah said. He was Thomas's favorite, stubborn as the day is long but loyal. The best ones usually are, Jacob replied with a smile that made Sarah's stomach flutter unexpectedly. She cleared her throat. I'll show you to the bunkhouse. It hasn't been used in months, so it needs airing out. The small building sat about 50 yards from the main house, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy. Inside were 4 bunks, a table with chairs, a small stove, and a washstand. Jacob set his saddlebags on one of the bunks and looked around appreciatively. This will do nicely, he said. After some of the places I've slept, this is downright luxurious. I'll bring you some linens, Sarah offered, and you're welcome to take your meals at the house. No sense in both of us cooking separately. I appreciate that, Jacob said. Though I should warn you, I've been told my coffee could strip paint off a barn door. Sarah found herself smiling. Then perhaps you should let me handle the coffee. Gladly. He returned her smile, and for a moment, something warm and unfamiliar passed between them, a connection that had nothing to do with business agreements or ranch operations. Sarah broke eye contact first, suddenly flustered. I should start supper. We'll eat at 6. I'll be there, Jacob promised. After I check the rest of the property, if that's all right with you, of course. It's your ranch too now. The words still felt strange on her tongue. As she walked back to the house, Sarah found herself looking at the familiar buildings and land with new eyes, trying to see it as Jacob might, not just as it was now, run down and struggling, but as it could be again. For the first time in months, she felt something dangerously close to hope. Inside the house, as she prepared a beef stew that would stretch their supplies, Sarah thought about the day's events. In the span of hours, she had gone from facing certain ruin to having a business partner and $500 in the bank. The ranch was safe, at least for now. But she had also invited a stranger into her life, a man who would be living on her property, working beside her every day. A man who, she had to admit, made her feel things she had thought were buried along with Thomas. Through the kitchen window, she could see Jacob moving around the property, examining fences and outbuildings with a critical eye. He moved with confidence and purpose, clearly at home in a ranch environment. Despite her initial reservations, Sarah was beginning to believe she had made the right decision. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at the door. Sarah smoothed her hair, suddenly self-conscious before opening it to find Jacob standing there, freshly washed, his dark hair still damp at the temples. "Something smells wonderful," he said. "Just beef stew," Sarah replied, stepping back to let him enter. "Nothing fancy." After months of trail cooking, anything that isn't beans or salt pork is fancy to me, he assured her with a grin. The kitchen table was already set for two, the first time since Thomas's death that Sarah had set more than one place. It felt strange but not unwelcome to have company for the evening meal. "I notice the windmill needs repairs," Jacob said as they sat down. "The pump's working, but it's not as efficient as it could be." "Thomas always meant to fix it," Sarah replied, serving the stew. "But then he got sick, and after that—" She trailed off, the familiar ache of loss momentarily stealing her words. "I'm sorry," Jacob said quietly. "It must have been difficult losing him and trying to manage everything alone." Sarah nodded, grateful for his understanding. "It was." She corrected. "But life goes on, doesn't it? We either move forward or get left behind." "True words," Jacob agreed, tasting the stew. "This is delicious, by the way." "Thank you." Sarah watched him eat with obvious appreciation and felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. It had been so long since she'd cooked for anyone but herself, so long since anyone had enjoyed the simple comforts she could provide. As they ate, Jacob shared more of his background, telling stories of cattle drives and the characters he'd met on the trail. Sarah found herself laughing for the first time in months at his description of a particularly ornery cook who'd once chased a cowboy around camp with a cast-iron skillet after the unfortunate man had criticized his biscuits. "What about you?" Jacob asked as Sarah poured coffee after the meal. "How did you end up in North Platte?" Sarah smiled faintly at the memory. "Thomas and I came west from Illinois in '72. He had dreams of building a cattle empire. We started with 20 acres and 4 cows, and built it to one of the finest spreads in the county," Jacob finished. "That takes determination. And a lot of hard work," Sarah added. "We did everything ourselves at first, built the house, dug the well, cleared the fields. Thomas taught me to ride and shoot, said a rancher's wife needed to be as tough as her husband." "Sounds like a wise man." "He was." Sarah traced the rim of her coffee cup. "Though some might say his wisdom failed him when he borrowed too much to expand just before the drought hit." "No one could have predicted how bad it would get," Jacob said. "Sometimes the land tests us to see if we're worthy of it." Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. "And are we worthy?" "I believe so," he replied simply. "You fought for this place when many would have given up. That counts for something." They fell into a comfortable silence, finishing their coffee as twilight deepened outside the windows. Finally, Jacob stood. "Thank you for supper," he said, "and for taking a chance on a stranger." "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep fighting," Sarah replied honestly. In the doorway, Jacob paused. "We start at dawn tomorrow," Sarah nodded. "I'll have breakfast ready." "Good night, Sarah." "Good night, Jacob." As she watched him walk toward the bunkhouse, his figure silhouetted against the darkening sky, Sarah felt the strangest sensation, as if after months of standing still, She had finally taken a step forward. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of ranch life. She dressed quickly and headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, surprised to find the coffee already brewing and Jacob slicing bacon at the table. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "Hope you don't mind. I thought I'd get a head start." "Not at all," Sarah replied, momentarily flustered by his presence in her kitchen. In the early morning light, with his sleeves rolled up and his hair still tousled from sleep, he looked disconcertingly at home. "I thought you said your coffee would strip paint." "It would," he admitted with a chuckle. "I just put the pot on. I was waiting for you to actually brew it." Sarah laughed and moved to the stove, their shoulders nearly brushing as she took over the coffee preparation. The kitchen suddenly felt much smaller than it ever had before. Over breakfast, they discussed the day's priorities: repairing the windmill, checking the remaining cattle, and assessing the condition of the north pasture fence. As they talked, Sarah was struck by how naturally they fell into planning together, each contributing ideas and knowledge. "I think we should start with the windmill," Jacob suggested. "Water's the priority, especially with the drought." Sarah nodded her agreement. "I have Thomas's tools in the barn." After breakfast, they walked together to the barn, where Jacob examined the tools with approval. "Your husband kept good equipment." "He believed in quality over quantity," Sarah explained, watching as Jacob selected what he needed. "Said a poor workman blames his tools, but a wise one never gives them reason to be blamed." "Smart man," Jacob commented, gathering the tools. "Would you mind helping me with the windmill? It's a two-person job." Sarah hesitated. "I've never worked on the windmill before." "I'll show you what to do," he assured her. "Unless you have other tasks you'd rather attend to." The truth was, Sarah had intended to do laundry, a chore she usually tackled on Mondays, but something in Jacob's open expression made her nod. "I'd be happy to help." For the next several hours they worked together on the windmill. Jacob patiently explained each step as they tightened bolts, greased gears, and replaced a worn belt. Sarah found herself enjoying the work, despite the heat and the occasional frustration when her smaller hands struggled with a stubborn bolt. "You're a natural," Jacob praised when she successfully adjusted a valve that had been causing problems. "Most people don't have the patience for this kind of detailed work." "I've had practice," Sarah replied. "Ranch life teaches patience, whether you want to learn it or not." By midday, the windmill was turning smoothly, the pump delivering a stronger flow of water than Sarah had seen in months. They stood back to admire their work, faces streaked with dirt and grease but satisfied with the accomplishment. "That will make a big difference," Jacob said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Especially when we increase the herd." "If we can increase the herd," Sarah cautioned. 7 cattle don't make much of a start." "Those strays I mentioned will help," Jacob replied confidently. "And I heard in town that the Frederickson place is selling off some of their stock. They're moving back east. Husband got consumption." Sarah frowned. "The Fredericksons? I hadn't heard." "Martha must be devastated. John built that place from nothing." "Life out here is hard," Jacob said quietly. "Not everyone can weather the storms." "No," Sarah agreed, thinking of all the families who had come and gone in the 6 years she'd lived in North Platte. "Not everyone can." They returned to the house for a quick midday meal of bread, cheese, and cold coffee. As they ate, Sarah noticed Jacob studying the kitchen with a thoughtful expression. "What is it?" she asked. "Just thinking this kitchen could use some improvements," he replied. "The stove's positioned poorly for ventilation, and that pump leaks." Sarah bristled slightly. "It served me well enough." Jacob seemed to sense her defensiveness. "I didn't mean to criticize. I just like to fix things when I see them not working as well as they could." Some things don't need fixing, Jacob, Sarah said, more sharply than she intended. They just need accepting as they are. A shadow crossed his face. You're right. I apologize. The tension between them lingered as they finished eating in silence. Sarah regretted her harsh response, but something about his casual assessment of her kitchen, her domain, had touched a raw nerve. She had grown accustomed to managing on her own, making do with what she had. His suggestion of improvements, however well-intentioned, felt like criticism of her ability to cope. "We should check the north pasture fence," she said finally, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Jacob nodded, rising from the table. "I'll saddle the horses." As he left, Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. This partnership would require adjustments on both sides. She would need to remember that Jacob's suggestions came from a desire to help, not to criticize. And he would need to understand that this was still her home, even if it was now their ranch. By late afternoon, they had ridden the entire north pasture fence line, marking sections that needed repair. The damage was extensive: multiple posts rotted or fallen, wire sagging or broken in dozens of places. "This will take weeks to fix properly," Sarah observed, dismounting near a particularly bad section. "Not with both of us working on it," Jacob replied, swinging down from his horse. "We can prioritize the worst sections first, make temporary repairs to the rest." He knelt to examine a broken post, testing the wood with his hands. "We'll need new posts for this stretch. The old ones are too far gone." "There's a stand of suitable trees on the eastern edge of the property," Sarah said. "Thomas always harvested fence posts from there." Jacob looked up at her, squinting against the late afternoon sun. "You know this land well." "I should," she replied with a small smile. "I've bled and sweated over every acre of it." Something in her words seemed to touch him, and he stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "I'd like to learn it that well," he said quietly, "to know it like you do." The simple honesty in his voice disarmed her completely. "I can teach you," she offered, "if you'll be patient with me when I'm difficult." Jacob's smile broadened. "I reckon we can teach each other a few things, Sarah Porter." The ride back to the ranch was companionable, the earlier tension forgotten as they discussed plans for the coming days. By the time they reached the barn, the sun was setting, painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Beautiful," Jacob commented as they unsaddled the horses. "It is," Sarah agreed, looking out at the familiar vista with fresh appreciation. "Sometimes I forget to notice." "That's easy to do when you're just trying to survive," he said. "But the beauty's always there, waiting to be seen again." Sarah glanced at him, wondering if he was still talking about the sunset. His profile in the fading light was strong and clean, his expression peaceful as he tended to his horse with gentle hands. Later, after another shared meal and pleasant conversation, Sarah found herself sitting on the porch steps, watching the stars appear one by one in the velvet darkness. The night was cool but not cold, the air scented with sage and dust, and the distant promise of rain. The sound of footsteps made her look up to see Jacob approaching from the bunkhouse. He paused at the bottom of the steps, gesturing to the empty space beside her. "Mind if I join you?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Please." He settled beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds: the soft hooting of an owl, the rustle of wind through dry grass, the occasional stamping of horses in the corral. "I missed this," Jacob said eventually, his voice low. "On the trail, you never really stop moving long enough to just be." "Is that why you wanted land of your own?" Sarah asked. "To have a place to just be," he nodded, his gaze on the distant horizon. "Partly. But mostly I wanted something that would last." something I could build with my own hands and see grow over time. I understand that, Sarah said softly. It's why I couldn't bear to lose this place. It's not just land, it's everything Thomas and I worked for, everything we dreamed of. Jacob turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful in the starlight. You loved him very much. I did, Sarah confirmed. We were young when we married. I was barely 18, he was 23. Everyone said we were rushing, but we knew what we wanted. She smiled at the memory. We had 10 good years together. That's more than many people get, Jacob observed. Yes, Sarah agreed, though it doesn't make losing him any easier. They fell silent again, the weight of shared confidences hanging between them like an invisible thread. Sarah was acutely aware of Jacob's presence beside her, the solid breadth of his shoulders, the clean scent of soap that clung to him, the way his hands rested easily on his knees. I should turn in, she said finally, rising to her feet. Tomorrow will be another long day. Jacob stood as well. Thank you for sharing your evening with me, and your memories. Thank you for listening, Sarah replied, surprised by how much she meant it. It had been so long since she'd spoken of Thomas to anyone who hadn't known him, someone who could listen without offering platitudes or awkward sympathy. As Jacob descended the steps, he turned back. Good night, Sarah. Good night, Jacob. Watching him walk away in the moonlight, Sarah felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest, something between apprehension and anticipation. She was stepping into unknown territory, not just in business but perhaps in her heart as well. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of shared work and growing understanding. Jacob proved himself to be as skilled and hardworking as his references had claimed, tackling each task with competence and determination. Together, they repaired fences, tended the remaining cattle, planted winter wheat in the south field, and began preparations for expanding the herd. A week after Jacob's arrival, they rode out early to look for the strays he had spotted in the hills. The morning was cool and clear, the sky a vast blue canopy above the rolling landscape. They were grazing in that valley beyond the ridge, Jacob said, pointing eastward. If they've stayed in the area, we should be able to drive them back to the ranch. Sarah nodded, adjusting her hat against the sun. Let's hope they're still there. We could use the addition to our herd. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk the only sounds. Sarah found herself studying Jacob's profile against the landscape, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert and observant. What? He asked, catching her gaze. Sarah felt a blush rise to her cheeks at being caught staring. Just thinking you seem at home here already. Jacob smiled. I feel at home here, more than anywhere I've been in a long while. Something in his tone made Sarah's heart beat a little faster. Before she could respond, Jacob reined his horse to a stop, raising a hand to shade his eyes. There they are, he said, pointing to a cluster of dark shapes in the distance. I count at least 12 head. Sarah followed his gaze, making out the cattle grazing peacefully in a shallow depression about half a mile away. They look healthy enough. Let's circle around and approach from downwind, Jacob suggested. We don't want to spook them. Working together with the practiced coordination they had developed over the past week, Sarah and Jacob slowly herded the cattle, which proved to be 16 in total, a significant addition to their meager herd. The animals were indeed strays, bearing no brand that Sarah recognized from the area. By law, unclaimed cattle can be taken in and branded after a public notice, Sarah said as they slowly drove the herd toward the ranch. We'll need to post a notice in town. And if no one claims them, Jacob asked. After 30 days, they're legally ours, Sarah replied. Though I doubt anyone will claim them. Most of these are probably survivors from herds that scattered during the worst of the drought. Their owners have either given up ranching or moved on. Jacob nodded. 16 head plus our 7. It's a start. A good start, Sarah agreed, feeling genuine optimism for the first time in months. By mid-afternoon, they had successfully driven the cattle into the south pasture with the existing herd. Standing at the fence, watching the animals graze, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing for too long. "We did it," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "We did," Jacob agreed, his smile matching hers. "First step toward rebuilding." Without thinking, Sarah impulsively reached out and squeezed his arm. "Thank you, Jacob, for everything." His expression softened as he covered her hand with his own. "Partners, remember, your victories are mine now too." The warmth of his hand over hers sent a current of awareness through Sarah that she couldn't ignore. Flustered, she withdrew her hand, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "We should head back," she said, turning toward the horses. "There's still the chicken coop to repair before sundown." If Jacob noticed her sudden withdrawal, he gave no sign, simply mounting his horse and falling in beside her for the short ride back to the ranch buildings. But Sarah was acutely conscious of a shift in her feelings, a dangerous softening toward this man who had arrived so unexpectedly in her life. That evening, as they shared another meal, conversation flowed easily between them. Jacob told stories of his travels, painting vivid pictures of the places he had seen, the rugged beauty of the Montana mountains, the endless horizons of the Texas plains, the bustling energy of growing towns like Cheyenne and Dodge City. "Have you ever thought of traveling?" he asked Sarah as they lingered over coffee. Seeing more of the country, Sarah considered the question. "Sometimes. When Thomas was alive, we talked about visiting San Francisco once the ranch was established. After he died," she shrugged. "Dreams like that seemed pointless." "They don't have to be," Jacob said. "Dreams have a way of changing, not dying." "Is that what happened to your dreams?" Sarah asked, curious about the path that had led him to her door. Jacob's expression grew thoughtful. "In a way. When I was younger, I dreamed of adventure, new places, new faces. I found plenty of both, but eventually I realized what I really wanted was a place to call my own, somewhere to build something lasting." "And now you have it," Sarah observed. "Half a struggling ranch in drought-stricken Nebraska." Jacob laughed. "When you put it that way, it doesn't sound very impressive, but yes, now I have it or part of it, and I don't regret my decision." "I'm glad," Sarah said softly. "Neither do I." Their eyes met across the table, and Sarah felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Each day, it became harder to maintain the emotional distance she had tried to establish. Jacob Dawson was no longer just a business partner or a convenient solution to her financial problems. He was becoming a friend, perhaps something more, if she allowed it, and therein lay the danger. Sarah had built walls around her heart after Thomas's death, convinced that she would never marry again, never risk that kind of loss a second time. The whispers in town, "She'll never be a wife again," had been painful but ultimately true to her own feelings. Until now. "Sarah." Jacob's voice broke into her thoughts. "Where did you go just now?" She blinked, realizing she had been staring absently at her coffee cup. "Nowhere important, just thinking." "About?" His gentle persistence was difficult to resist. "The future," she admitted. "How quickly things can change." Jacob nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Change can be frightening." "Yes," Sarah agreed, "but sometimes necessary." As October gave way to November, the ranch began to show visible signs of improvement. The fences were repaired, the windmill working perfectly, the winter wheat sprouting in neat green rows in the south field. Jacob had built a new chicken coop, and repaired the roof of the barn just in time for the first light snow, which dusted the landscape like powdered sugar before melting away under the still warm autumn sun. Their herd now numbered 25, with Jacob having purchased 2 young bulls from a rancher north of town who was scaling back his operation. The strays had officially become their property after the 30-day notice period expired with no claims. Sarah found herself looking forward to each day in a way she hadn't since Thomas was alive. The shared work, the companionable meals, the evening conversations on the porch when weather permitted all, had become precious routines she cherished. And she couldn't deny that Jacob himself was a large part of her renewed happiness. His steady presence, his quiet strength, his unexpected moments of humor all had worked their way past her defenses, creating feelings she was increasingly unable to ignore. One crisp November morning, Sarah woke to the sound of hammering. Curious, she dressed quickly and followed the noise to the front of the house, where she found Jacob constructing what appeared to be a porch swing. "Good morning," he called when he spotted her, setting down his hammer. "I hope I didn't wake you too early." "Not at all," Sarah replied, approaching to examine his work. "What's this?" "A swing," Jacob explained somewhat unnecessarily. "I noticed how much time we spend on the porch in the evenings, and thought it might be nice to have something more comfortable than those steps to sit on." Sarah ran her hand along the smooth wooden seat, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "It's beautiful work." "Where did you get the wood?" "From that old oak that fell in the north pasture last year," Jacob said. The heart was still solid, seemed ashamed to waste good wood. "Thomas always meant to haul that tree away," Sarah murmured. "He never found the time." "Well, now it will have a new purpose," Jacob replied, picking up his hammer again. "Should be finished by this evening if you don't mind the noise." "I don't mind at all," Sarah assured him. Throughout the day, as she went about her tasks, Sarah found her thoughts returning to the swing and what it represented. Jacob wasn't just repairing what was broken on the ranch. He was adding new elements, creating comforts and improvements that would last for years. He was building as if he intended to stay. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. In the 6 weeks since Jacob had arrived, he had become essential to the ranch's operation, and if she was honest with herself, to her happiness as well. But their partnership agreement said nothing about permanence. What if, once the ranch was prosperous again, he decided to move on? Or what if he expected more from their relationship than she was prepared to give? By evening, the swing was complete, hanging from sturdy chains attached to the porch ceiling. After supper, Jacob invited Sarah to test it out. "Ladies first," he said with a smile, gesturing to the new addition. Sarah settled onto the smooth wooden seat, which proved to be remarkably comfortable. "You do fine work, Jacob Dawson." "Thank you kindly, madam," he replied, tipping an imaginary hat before sitting beside her, careful to leave space between them. They swung gently for a few moments, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The evening was cool but not cold, the air still with the peculiar clarity that often precedes winter. "The Frederickson place sold," Jacob said after a while. "Heard it in town yesterday when I went for supplies." "Oh, who bought it?" Sarah asked, curious about their neighbors. "Family named Whitaker from Illinois. Father, mother, 3 grown sons. They'll be moving in after Christmas." "That's good news," Sarah said. "That place has good water and decent grazing. Shame for it to sit empty." Jacob nodded. "Speaking of Christmas, it's less than a month away." "Do you have any particular traditions?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Last Christmas had been her first without Thomas, and she had barely acknowledged the holiday, too deep in grief and financial worry to celebrate. "Not recently," she admitted. "Though when Thomas was alive, We used to have a small tree with popcorn strings, and I'd make a special dinner. My mother always insisted on new candles for Christmas Eve, Jacob recalled. Said the light was meant to welcome the Christ child. Even in the leanest years, she'd save pennies for those candles. That's lovely, Sarah said, touched by the memory he had shared. Maybe we could have a tree this year, Jacob suggested tentatively. And candles, if you'd like. The simple offer the chance to reclaim a celebration she had abandoned brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, hoping Jacob hadn't noticed in the gathering darkness. I would like that, she said softly. Jacob reached over, his hand finding hers on the swing between them. His touch was warm and gentle, asking nothing, offering comfort and connection. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah turned her palm upward, letting their fingers intertwine. They sat that way for some time, swinging gently, hands joined, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky. Sarah knew they were crossing a boundary, moving from partnership to something more intimate, but she couldn't bring herself to pull away. For this moment, at least, she would allow herself the simple comfort of his touch. Sarah, Jacob said eventually, his voice low in the darkness. I need to tell you something. Her heart quickened at his serious tone. What is it? He turned to face her, though their hands remained joined. When I came to North Platte, it wasn't by chance. What do you mean? Jacob took a deep breath. I knew about Porter Ranch before I arrived. I'd heard about Thomas's death and the drought troubles from a cattle buyer in Cheyenne. He mentioned that the widow Porter was likely to lose the place to the bank. Sarah stiffened. So you came looking for a bargain, a failing ranch you could snap up cheaply. No, Jacob insisted, tightening his hold on her hand when she tried to withdraw it. Please, let me finish. Yes, I came looking for the ranch, but not to take advantage. I came because everything I heard about the place and about you made me think this might be somewhere I could belong. You didn't know me, Sarah said, confusion and hurt warring in her chest. I knew enough, Jacob replied. I knew you were fighting to hold onto your land when many would have given up. I knew you were respected in the community, even by those who thought a woman couldn't manage alone. And when I met you, standing outside that bank with your head held high despite that foreclosure notice, I knew I wanted to help you keep this place, not take it from you. Sarah was silent, absorbing his words, trying to reconcile them with the man she had come to know. I should have told you sooner, Jacob continued, but I was afraid you'd mistrust my motives. And then, as we worked together, it seemed less important how I came to be here than what we were building together. Why tell me now? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob's expression was earnest in the starlight. Because I don't want any secrets between us. Not if. He hesitated, then forged ahead. Not if there's a chance for us to be more than business partners. The words hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Sarah's heart raced, her emotions a tumultuous mix of hope and fear. I don't know if I can be what you want, Jacob, she said finally. After Thomas died, I swore I'd never marry again, never risk that kind of loss a second time. I'm not asking for promises, Jacob replied gently. Just a chance. A chance to show you that loving again doesn't diminish what you had with Thomas, that your heart is big enough for both memories and new beginnings. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, symbol of a connection that had grown stronger with each passing day. Could she truly open herself to loving again, to the vulnerability and risk that love entailed? I need time, she said at last. Time is something we have plenty of, Jacob assured her, his thumb tracing a gentle pattern on the back of her hand. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. Not unless you ask me to. The certainty in his voice was both comforting and overwhelming. Sarah found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by the warmth and steadiness he offered. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said, "about why you came here." "Thank you for listening," he replied, "and for not sending me packing." A smile tugged at her lips despite her confusion. "The ranch needs you. I'm not foolish enough to let my pride interfere with that." "Just the ranch?" Jacob asked softly, a question in his eyes that made Sarah's breath catch. "I've grown accustomed to your company," she admitted, unable to give voice to the deeper feelings stirring within her. "The house was very quiet before you came." Jacob nodded, accepting her cautious response without pressing for more. "It's getting cold," he observed. "We should go in." As they rose from the swing, their hands still loosely joined, Sarah felt as if she stood on the edge of a precipice, behind her the safety of solitude, ahead the unknown territory of opening her heart again. She wasn't ready to leap, but for the first time, she could imagine wanting to. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of activity. The weather turned colder, bringing the first lasting snow, a light blanket that transformed the ranch into a pristine wonderland of white. Jacob continued his improvements to the property, building shelters for the cattle and reinforcing the barn against winter storms, while Sarah focused on preserving the last of the fall vegetables and preparing the house for the coming season. Their evening conversations continued, though neither mentioned Jacob's revelation or the possibility of deepening their relationship. It was as if they had tacitly agreed to let the subject rest, giving Sarah the time she had requested. But small changes marked their interactions, a lingering touch when passing the coffee, a shared smile over some private joke, the way they gravitated toward each other in the evenings, sitting closer on the swing than strictly necessary for warmth. A week before Christmas, Jacob rode into town for supplies, returning with not only the necessities but also small luxuries: cinnamon and nutmeg for baking, bright ribbon for decorations, even a small package wrapped in brown paper that he refused to let Sarah see, tucking it away with a mysterious smile. "I thought we might cut a tree tomorrow," he suggested as they prepared supper together, a routine that had developed naturally over the weeks. "There's a stand of pines on the western ridge that would suit." "That would be nice," Sarah agreed, trying to ignore the flutter of anticipation in her chest. It had been so long since she'd celebrated anything. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. After breakfast, they bundled up and rode out to the western ridge, where Jacob had spotted suitable trees. "What about this one?" he asked, pointing to a small, perfectly shaped pine about 6 feet tall. Sarah circled it appraisingly. "It's perfect." With quick, efficient strokes, Jacob felled the tree, then secured it across his horse for the journey back to the ranch. As they rode, side by side through the glistening landscape, Sarah found herself studying his profile against the winter sky: the straight nose, the firm jaw now sporting a neatly trimmed beard that he had grown as the weather turned colder. "What is it?" Jacob asked, catching her gaze just as he had that day they'd gone looking for strays. This time, Sarah didn't look away. "Just thinking how different everything is from this time last year." "Better or worse?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "Different," Sarah repeated. Then, more softly, "Better in many ways." Jacob's smile warmed her more effectively than her heavy coat. "I'm glad to hear that." At the house, they positioned the tree in the corner of the sitting room where its fresh pine scent quickly filled the space. Sarah brought out a box of decorations she hadn't opened since Thomas's death, simple wooden ornaments he had carved over the years. A star fashioned from tin for the top, ribbons saved from previous Christmases. "These are beautiful," Jacob said, examining one of the carved ornaments, a delicate angel with outspread wings. "Thomas made one every year," Sarah explained, running her finger over the smooth wood. "Said our tree should tell our story." Jacob looked up, something soft and questioning in his eyes. "Would he mind if we added to the story?" Sarah considered the question, imagining what Thomas would think of this man who had helped save their ranch, who made her smile again, who looked at her with such warmth and patience. "No," she said finally. "I don't think he would mind at all." Together they decorated the tree, hanging the carved ornaments, draping strands of popcorn Sarah had prepared, adding touches of ribbon for color. When it was finished, they stepped back to admire their work. "It needs one more thing," Jacob said, disappearing briefly before returning with a package. "This is for the tree, not for Christmas Day." Curious, Sarah unwrapped the brown paper to find a small wooden ornament, a perfect miniature of their barn, complete with tiny details like the weather vane and the new shutters Jacob had installed. "You made this?" she asked, turning it in her hands with wonder. Jacob nodded. "I've been working on it in the evenings. Thomas had the right idea, the tree should tell your story. I thought this year's chapter deserved marking." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as she carefully hung the ornament on a prominent branch. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to face him. "Thank you, Jacob." They stood close, the decorated tree beside them, the moment heavy with unspoken feelings. Jacob reached up, his hand gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from Sarah's face. "Sarah," he said softly, a question in his voice. She knew what he was asking permission to cross the final boundary between them, to acknowledge what had been growing between them for weeks. Her heart pounded as she met his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of hope and uncertainty she felt in her own heart. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, Jacob lowered his head toward hers. Sarah closed her eyes as his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper. His hand came to rest lightly at her waist, steadying but not confining, as he drew back just enough to gauge her response. Sarah opened her eyes to find him watching her, his expression a mixture of wonder and concern. She answered his unspoken question by raising her hand to his cheek, feeling the softness of his beard against her palm as she drew him back to her for another kiss, this one less hesitant. A meeting of equals choosing each other. When they finally parted, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I've been wanting you to," Sarah confessed, surprising herself with the truth of it. Jacob's smile was like sunrise. "Does this mean you're ready for that chance I mentioned?" Sarah took a deep breath, the scent of pine and Jacob's clean soap filling her lungs. "I think it might," she said, "though I'm still afraid." "Of what?" he asked gently. "Of losing again," Sarah admitted. "Of opening my heart only to have it broken." "I can't promise we won't face hardships," Jacob said honestly. "But I can promise to face them with you, not leave you to weather them alone." His words touched her deeply, not a false assurance that nothing would go wrong, but a pledge of partnership through whatever came. It was, Sarah realized, exactly what she needed to hear. "Then yes," she said, "I'm ready to try." The kiss they shared then was deeper, a sealing of promises and a beginning all at once. Sarah felt something long frozen within her begin to thaw, the capacity for joy, for hope, for love that she had thought died with Thomas. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white. Sarah woke early, her heart light with anticipation in a way it hadn't been in years. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the amber flecks in her eyes, and arranged her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. In the kitchen, she found Jacob had been there before her coffee brewing, the table set for breakfast, a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon placed beside her plate. "Merry Christmas," His voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway, freshly shaved, wearing a clean shirt she hadn't seen before. "Merry Christmas," she replied, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had shared in the days since that first kiss. They had progressed no further than kisses and embraces, both content to let their relationship develop slowly, but each touch, each shared glance held the promise of deeper connection to come. "You look beautiful," Jacob said, crossing to her and taking her hands in his. "Thank you," Sarah replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "You're quite handsome yourself." His smile was tender as he leaned down to brush a kiss against her lips. "I see you found your present." "You shouldn't have," Sarah protested, though she couldn't deny the pleasure she felt at the thoughtfulness. "Open it," Jacob urged, pulling out her chair. Sarah sat, carefully untying the ribbon and unwrapping the package to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with a delicate floral pattern carved into the lid. "Jacob," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate design. "It's exquisite." "Open it," he repeated, his expression eager as he took the seat across from her. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a silver brooch in the shape of a rose, small but finely detailed with a tiny pearl at its center. "It was my mother's," Jacob explained as Sarah lifted it from the box. "The only thing of hers I kept after she died. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to." Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she looked up at him. "Jacob, I can't accept this. It's too precious." "That's exactly why I want you to have it," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Because you're precious to me, Sarah, more than I ever expected anyone to be again." Sarah closed her fingers around the brooch, deeply moved by the gift and its significance. "I have something for you as well," she said, "though it's not nearly so fine." Rising, she went to the cupboard and retrieved a package wrapped in plain brown paper. "It isn't much," she warned as she handed it to him. Jacob unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in rich brown wool, with subtle patterns worked into the stitches. "You made this?" he asked, running his fingers over the soft wool. Sarah nodded. "I've been working on it in the evenings after you'd gone to the bunkhouse. I noticed your old one was wearing thin." "It's perfect," Jacob said, wrapping it around his neck immediately. "And knowing you made it yourself makes it all the more special." They shared a simple breakfast, then spent the morning together in the sitting room, the tree sparkling in the corner, talking and simply enjoying each other's company. In the afternoon, Jacob helped Sarah prepare a Christmas dinner more elaborate than anything she had attempted since Thomas's death, a roast chicken with all the trimmings, followed by an apple pie that filled the house with its cinnamon fragrance. As they sat together after the meal, contentment settled over Sarah like a warm blanket. The house felt alive again, filled with conversation and laughter instead of echoing silence. She found herself studying Jacob's face as he talked, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the animated gestures of his hands as he described plans for spring planting. "What is it?" he asked, catching her watching him. "Just thinking how grateful I am," Sarah replied honestly. "For you, for this day, for the chance to feel joy again." Jacob's expression softened. "I'm the grateful one, Sarah. When I came to North Platte, I was looking for land, for a place to belong. I found so much more." He rose from his chair and came to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his. His expression was suddenly serious, his eyes intent on hers. "Sarah Porter, I know we haven't known each other long in the counting of months, but in the ways that matter, in trust, in respect, in understanding, I feel I've known you all my life." Sarah's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. "Jacob, please," he said gently. "Let me finish. I came here looking for a partnership, but I found a partner in every sense of the word. Someone I want to build a life with, not just a ranch." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "My grandfather gave it to her when they homesteaded in Missouri, promising her that whatever hardships came, they'd face them together." Jacob held the ring between them, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm making you the same promise, Sarah. Whatever comes, drought or plenty, sorrow or joy, we'll face it together, if you'll have me." Sarah looked at the man kneeling before her, this man who had walked into her life when she needed him most, who had respected her independence while offering his strength, who had patiently waited while she learned to trust her heart again. "They said I'd never be a wife again," she said softly, remembering the whispers that had followed her through town in the months after Thomas's death. Jacob's smile was gentle. "Then I'll be husband enough for both of us." The simple declaration, so full of understanding and acceptance, broke through the last of Sarah's resistance. She knew with sudden clarity that loving Jacob didn't diminish what she had shared with Thomas. Her heart hadn't divided its affection. It had expanded to embrace a new love alongside the treasured memories of the old. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy spilling onto her cheeks. "Yes, Jacob Dawson, I'll marry you." His face lit with such happiness that Sarah felt her heart might burst. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, and then rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. The kiss they shared was a promise and a beginning, tender yet passionate, sealed with tears and laughter, and the certainty that what they had found together was rare and precious. "When?" Jacob asked as they finally drew apart, his arms still holding her close. "Spring," Sarah decided. "When the land comes back to life. It seems fitting. Spring it is," Jacob agreed, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Though it seems a long time to wait." Sarah smiled up at him, feeling younger and lighter than she had in years. "We have the rest of our lives, Jacob. A few months is nothing." His answering smile was all the confirmation she needed that she had made the right choice. This man, this unexpected gift who had arrived when she needed him most, would indeed be husband enough for any woman wise enough to recognize his worth. As winter settled over the Nebraska plains, the ranch became a haven of warmth and promise. Sarah and Jacob worked side by side through January's bitter cold and February's fierce storms, their shared labor made lighter by the love growing between them. Jacob moved from the bunkhouse to the spare room in the main house, a compromise that respected propriety while allowing them to spend their evenings together by the fire, planning their future and learning each other's hearts. News of their engagement spread quickly through North Platte. Most received it with genuine pleasure, especially those who had worried about Sarah managing alone. A few raised eyebrows at the speed of the romance, but even the most dedicated gossips couldn't deny the visible happiness that radiated from the formerly somber widow. Florence Henderson was among the first to offer congratulations, arriving at the ranch with a basket of preserves and a knowing smile. "I knew it," she declared as she embraced Sarah. "The moment I saw you two in my store, I said to myself, that man's not just after her ranch. Florence." Sarah protested, though she couldn't help laughing at her friend's frankness. "Well, it's true," Florence insisted. "And I couldn't be happier for you, my dear. You deserve this chance at happiness." The winter months passed in a blur of shared work and quiet evenings. Jacob proved to be as skilled in courtship as he was in ranching, finding small ways to show his affection, bringing Sarah wildflowers he discovered blooming improbably through the snow, carving wooden animals for the mantel, reading aloud in the evenings from books they both enjoyed. Sarah, in turn, found herself opening to love in ways she had thought impossible after Thomas's death. She learned to share her thoughts and fears, to accept Jacob's strength without feeling diminished by it, to believe in a future bright with possibility rather than shadowed by loss. By March, when the first hints of spring began to soften the frozen landscape, preparations for their wedding were well underway. They had decided on a simple ceremony at the ranch, with only close friends in attendance, a celebration of their union and the promise of new beginnings. The date was set for the first Saturday in April, when the prairie would be beginning to green and the worst of spring storms likely past. Florence had offered to help with preparations, and the new pastor from the North Platte Church had agreed to perform the ceremony. As the day approached, Sarah found herself filled with a quiet joy that deepened with each passing hour. There were moments of wistfulness, of coarse memories of Thomas that surfaced unexpectedly, bringing a bittersweet ache to her heart. But increasingly, these memories came without pain, simply as part of the tapestry of her life. The night before the wedding, Sarah stood on the porch, watching as the last light faded from the western sky. The air was mild, scented with the promise of growth and renewal. Behind her in the house, Jacob was finishing some small repairs, insistent that everything be perfect for their guests the next day. She heard his footsteps before she felt his arms encircle her from behind, drawing her back against the solid warmth of his chest. Having second thoughts, he asked, his voice a rumble she could feel against her back. Sarah shook her head, covering his hands with her own where they rested at her waist. Not a single one. Good, Jacob said, pressing a kiss to her temple, because I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Sarah turned in his arms, looking up into the face that had become as dear and necessary to her as breath. I love you, Jacob Dawson, more than I ever thought possible. His smile was tender in the gathering darkness. And I love you, Sarah Porter, soon to be Sarah Dawson. Sarah Porter Dawson, she corrected. I'll keep a part of what was, even as I embrace what will be. Jacob nodded, understanding in his eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that seemed designed by Providence for new beginnings. Sarah dressed with Florence's help, wearing a gown of pale blue silk that had been her mother's, carefully preserved all these years, waiting for this moment of renewal. You look radiant, Florence declared, stepping back to survey her handiwork. Sarah's honey-brown hair was arranged in soft waves, adorned with white flowers from the first blooms of spring. At her throat gleamed Jacob's mother's brooch, a symbol of the past blessing the future. I feel radiant, Sarah admitted, studying her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was changed from the one who had stood outside the bank with a foreclosure notice clutched in her hand, not just in appearance, but in the light that shone from within, the hope that had replaced despair. The ceremony took place in the front yard of the ranch, beneath an arch Jacob had constructed and decorated with early spring blossoms. 30 guests' friends from town and neighboring ranches gathered to witness as Sarah walked toward Jacob, her hand resting on the arm of Mr. Ellis, the lawyer who had drawn up their original partnership agreement and now had the honor of giving the bride away. Jacob's face as he watched her approach was everything Sarah could have wished for: love, pride, and a touch of wonder lighting his features. He stood tall and handsome in a new suit, the brown scarf she had knitted for Christmas, folded neatly in his pocket as a gesture of sentimentality that touched her deeply. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with words of commitment and partnership that reflected their journey together. When Jacob slipped a second ring onto Sarah's finger to join her engagement band, this one, a simple gold circle engraved with their initials, and the date she felt the rightness of the moment settle into her bones like a truth long known, but only now acknowledged. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared, his voice carrying across the spring-touched prairie. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Jacob's kiss was gentle but possessive, a claiming and a promise that brought applause from their assembled friends. As they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Jacob Dawson, Sarah felt a completeness she had not expected to find again in this life. The celebration that followed was joyous, a feast spread on tables in the yard, music provided by local fiddlers, dancing that continued until the stars emerged in the darkening sky. Through it all, Jacob remained at Sarah's side, his hand finding hers in quiet moments, his eyes seeking hers across the gathering, his smile a private communication that needed no words. As the last guests departed with good wishes and knowing smiles, Sarah and Jacob stood together on the porch of what was now truly their home. The ranch spread before them, a legacy preserved and renewed, a promise of the future they would build together. "Happy, Mrs. Dawson?" Jacob asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I believed possible," Sarah admitted, leaning into his embrace. "And you?" "I have everything I ever wanted," he replied simply. "Land of my own, work that matters, and a woman I love more with each passing day." Later, in the privacy of what was now their bedroom, they came together as husband and wife, for the first time a union of bodies that mirrored the union of hearts and lives they had pledged before God and their community. In Jacob's tender touch, Sarah found healing for old wounds and awakening to new joys. In Sarah's passionate response, Jacob found the homecoming he had sought all his wandering years. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt Sarah's mother had made for her hope chest so many years ago, Jacob traced the contours of his wife's face with gentle fingers. "You know what I thought the first time I saw you?" he asked. Sarah shook her head, too content for words. "I thought, there's a woman who doesn't know when she's beaten," Jacob said. "And I knew then that I wanted to stand beside you, not just to help you save this land, but to share whatever life brought us." "And I thought you were just another drifter passing through," Sarah admitted with a soft laugh. "How wrong I was." "Not entirely," Jacob replied, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. "I was drifting, until I found you, until I found home, home." The word echoed in Sarah's heart as she curled closer to her husband. This house, this land had been home before with Thomas, in another life that seemed increasingly distant. But now it was home in a new way, transformed by Jacob's presence and the love they had found together. "They said I'd never be a wife again," Sarah murmured, remembering the whispers that had followed her through the difficult months after Thomas's death. Jacob's arms tightened around her. "And I said I'd be husband enough." "You are," Sarah assured him, raising her head to meet his gaze in the soft lamplight. "More than enough, more than I ever dared hope for." His kiss was tender, a sealing of promises and a beginning all at once. "Sleep now, wife," he whispered against her hair. "Tomorrow is the first day of our life together." As spring gave way to summer, and summer to fall, the Porter Dawson Ranch flourished under their joint care. The drought broke at last with gentle, soaking rains that turned the prairie green and filled the creeks to overflowing. Their cattle herd grew steadily, supplemented by careful purchases, and the natural increase of calves born under their stewardship. By their first anniversary, the ranch was not only secure, but beginning to prosper. Jacob had proven himself as skilled in business as he was in ranching, finding better markets for their cattle and negotiating favorable terms with suppliers. Sarah, freed from the constant worry of survival, had expanded the kitchen garden and added a small apple orchard that promised future bounty. Together, they had created not just a successful ranch, but a true home, a place of warmth and welcome for friends and travelers alike. The porch swing Jacob had built that first autumn became a favorite spot for evening conversations, planning sessions, and quiet moments of companionship as they watched the Nebraska sunsets paint the western sky. In the spring of their second year together, as the land awakened once more to new life, Sarah shared news that completed their happiness: a child would join their family before the year's end. Jacob's joy at the prospect of fatherhood was boundless. His care for Sarah during the months of waiting both tender and occasionally amusing in its overprotectiveness. Their daughter, named Rose Elizabeth Dawson, was born on a crisp October day, with Florence Henderson serving as midwife and Jacob pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door until the infant's first cry sent him rushing in to meet his child. The sight of his tall, strong husband cradling their tiny daughter with such wonder and gentleness brought tears to Sarah's eyes, tears of joy and gratitude for the fullness of the life they had created together. In the years that followed, the Porter-Dawson Ranch became known throughout the county as one of the most prosperous and hospitable spreads in the region. 2 more children joined the family: Thomas Jacob, born 2 years after Rose, and Mary Catherine, arriving 3 years later. The house expanded along with the family, with Jacob adding rooms and comforts as their needs and resources grew. Through it all, the challenges of raising children and cattle, the inevitable setbacks of weather and market fluctuations, the joys of watching their family and ranch flourish, Sarah and Jacob remained partners in the truest sense of the word. They faced each day together, their love deepening with shared experiences, their respect for each other growing with each obstacle overcome. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep and the day's work done, they would often sit together on the porch swing Jacob had built so long ago, watching the stars emerge over the land they had nurtured back to prosperity. In those moments, with Jacob's arm around her shoulders and the soft sounds of the Nebraska night surrounding them, Sarah would remember the desperate woman she had been, standing outside the bank with a foreclosure notice in her hand. "What are you thinking?" Jacob would sometimes ask, sensing her reflective mood, and Sarah would smile, leaning into the embrace of the man who had been husband enough when she thought she would never be a wife again. "I'm thinking how fortunate I am," she would reply, "how rich in all the ways that truly matter." For in the end, it wasn't the land or the cattle, or even the thriving ranch that measured their success. It was the love they had built together, a love strong enough to heal past wounds, brave enough to risk future pain, wise enough to treasure each moment of the present. They had saved the ranch, yes, but more importantly, they had saved each other, finding in their unlikely partnership a blessing neither had dared to seek, but both had desperately needed. And in that finding, they had created a legacy more lasting than property or possessions, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, living on in their children and in the stories that would be told of the widow who thought she'd never be a wife again, and the cowboy who proved to be husband enough for the journey they would share.